Smartest American presidents. Did you know that Donald Trump is the smartest president in U.S. history? Nah, I'm just kidding. But do you wonder how smart a U.S. president is? Dean Keith Simonton made scientific studies to calculate the IQ of U.S. presidents from George Washington to George W. Bush. So without further ado, let's start counting down some of the smartest U.S. presidents. The number 1 might surprise you. George W. Bush, IQ 138.5. He was the president during the 9/11 attacks and the author of the stupid war against Iraq. He was one of the dumbest presidents. James Monroe, IQ 138.6. His IQ of 138.6 may be the reason for being the last of the founding fathers to be president. Andrew Johnson, IQ 138.9. He was the first president to be impeached after favoring the restoration of the seceded states back to the Union without protection for the former slaves. This dumb move may be a reason for being one of the dumbest presidents. William Howard Taft, IQ 139.5. He is also the only person to become president and Chief Justice of the USA. Harry S. Truman, IQ 139.8. He was the president right at the end of World War II. He also led the beginning of the Cold War against the Soviet Union. His IQ is still one of the lowest among U.S. presidents. George Washington, IQ 140. The first president of the USA had among the lowest IQs on this list, but his low IQ did not stop him from becoming one of the founding fathers, nor did it hinder his love for his country. He started using the Bible during taking the oath of president. Maybe in his time, intelligence was not really a big factor in the selection of presidents. Gerald Ford, IQ 140.4. Gerald Ford took over the president's seat after the resignation of Richard Nixon. His IQ is slightly higher than a quarter of all the presidents. Lyndon B. Johnson, IQ 140.6. During his term, American presence became heavily involved in the Vietnam War. His IQ warrants the decision, and conflict may have been avoided if a smarter president was in the office. Herbert Hoover, IQ 141.6. Herbert Hoover was the seating president during the start of the Great Depression. He was one of the most unpopular presidents of the USA. He had an IQ of 141.6, which is just average among presidents. Ronald Reagan, IQ 141.9. The Hollywood actor turned politician Ronald Reagan had a great run at politics. His presidential term was dominated by economic reforms such as tax reductions and decreased government spending. He had a pretty high approval rating right after his second term. Richard Nixon, IQ 142.9. He was caught up in the Watergate scandal during the early part of his second term. His involvement in the scandal forced him to resign as the president. His high IQ showed that intelligence is not always enough to be a good president. George H.W. Bush, IQ 143. He was the sitting president during the end of the Cold War after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He has a higher IQ than his son, and many historians ranked him as an above-average president. William McKinley, IQ 143.4. William McKinley's IQ level is tied to James K. Polk's. He was among the 4 presidents to be assassinated. Grover Cleveland, IQ 144. He was the only president to hold office for 2 non-consecutive terms, making him the 22nd and 24th president of the USA. Maybe Trump will be the second? Dwight Eisenhower, IQ 145.1. We have the interstate highways system all thanks to Dwight Eisenhower. He has a slightly higher IQ than Andrew Jackson. Rutherford B. Hayes, IQ 146.3. Rutherford B. Hayes, with an IQ of 146.3, was among the most intelligent back in his days. He was so smart that there were only about 2,500 people smarter than him during his time. Just wow. William Henry Harrison, IQ 146.3. William Henry Harrison's term is the shortest presidency of all time, spanning only 31 days. His IQ of 146.3 is among the smartest presidents. Franklin Pierce, IQ 147.4. He has an IQ of 147.4, which is above the average for presidents. Historians and scholars ranked him among the least popular and probably the worst president in history. John Tyler, IQ 148. He was ranked as one of the least popular presidents. He is seldomly given cultural importance in American history. However, he is among the most intelligent presidents with an IQ of 148. Millard Fillmore, IQ 149. He has an above-average IQ of 149, which is near the top 25% of the smartest presidents. However, his presidency was among the worst in history, making him an unpopular president. Abraham Lincoln, IQ 150. Probably the most famous and influential president of all time, good old Abe Lincoln had an IQ of 150. He is best known for abolishing slavery, ending the Civil War, and preserving the Union. He is remembered as a martyr and a hero in American history. Franklin Roosevelt, IQ 150.5. One of the most famous presidents, he led the United States towards ending the Great Depression. He led the country mostly through World War II. He is also the longest-serving president at 12 years. His IQ ranks among the top quarter of smartest presidents. Chester Arthur, IQ 152.3. His name only became popular after being featured in the movie Die Hard with a Vengeance. James A. Garfield, IQ 152.3. He is tied with his successor, Chester Arthur, with an IQ of 152.3. Unfortunately, he was assassinated only 6 months after taking office. Theodore Roosevelt, IQ 153. The second most popular Roosevelt president is also considered among the greatest presidents in history. Theodore Roosevelt has an IQ of 153, which is pretty high. He promoted the conservation of national parks and natural sites to preserve the nation's resources. John Adams, IQ 155. He was one of the founding fathers. He helped out in the drafting of the U.S. Constitution. He has an IQ of 155, which is remarkably high. Woodrow Wilson, IQ 155.2. President Wilson was the main figure during the U.S. involvement in World War I. He was regarded as a genius and one of the best presidents. Jimmy Carter, IQ 156.8. The oldest living president today has a staggering IQ. Despite that, his intelligence was undermined by his actions while in office. Bill Clinton, IQ 159. Bill Clinton is the 5th smartest president. Despite leaving office in 2001, he enjoyed one of the highest approval ratings among presidents. John F. Kennedy, IQ 159.8. He is the 4th smartest president. Unfortunately, he was assassinated early in his term, and we never saw enough of what he could have done with his intelligence. James Madison, IQ 160. He is the 2nd smartest president of the United States. Thomas Jefferson, IQ 160. The 3rd president had an IQ of 160. He is tied with James Madison for the 2nd smartest president. He was one of the founding fathers and wrote the Declaration of Independence. Before we reveal the smartest president in history, make sure you smash that like button and hit the subscribe and notification button if you haven't already done so, as it means that YouTube sends you more of these kinds of videos and it helps our channel. John Quincy Adams, IQ 175. With an IQ of 175, John Quincy Adams was the most intelligent president of the United States. His IQ level meant that he was smarter than 99.999943% of all people who were on Earth at the time. And there you have it, the smartest president, John Quincy Adams. If you're wondering why Obama, Trump, and Biden are not included in this ranking, it's because the scientific calculation of the president's IQs was conducted in 2006, way before their terms as president. Hopefully, someday another reliable calculation will be conducted which will include them. Thank you for being all ears throughout the entire video. If you'd like to learn more about the nature of this business, subscribe now and click on the notification bell to be updated with my latest uploads. If you want to expand your income by engaging with some side hustles, feel free to contact me so we'll get things moving right away. Remember, if you want to change your life, let's make a change together. You need to make a change.